You're locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin.
You're tuned in to NightVision Radio, exposing the truth one secret at a time. Prepare yourself as we explore the shadow worlds of suppressed history, secret knowledge, forbidden religion, and shine a light on the conspiracies to keep it all from us. Welcome to NightVision Radio. Well, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. We've got an exciting show planned. I would suggest that you fasten your seatbelts because it could get a little controversial. Anyway, but that's what we like, isn't it? Something to stimulate our brains. I just want to make a couple of quick little announcements before we get started with our guest tonight. Would love for you to stop by my Facebook page. Just go to René Barnett. I think there's a couple of us on Facebook, but I'm the one that's standing there in the derby hat waving, so you can't really miss me. Also, please, would you go to the NightVision Radio page on Facebook and like us over there? That helps us out, and we really appreciate it, and we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to post on either page. Keep it clean, though. Otherwise, I'll delete you. But anyhow, thanks again for joining us. Now, tonight I'm excited to have with us a returning guest. Haven't had him on for probably about a year, and it was before I arrived at Inception Radio. So this is his first time here with me, and I'm really excited to have author Freddy Silva. Hey, Freddy.
Hello, René.
How are you?
Oh, pretty good. Nice and warm and cozy in northern Maine.
Yeah. Oh, really? How cozy is it over there?
It's not snowing. That's what we mean by cozy.
Well, yeah, I guess we were just hearing our producer, MJ, talking about having snow where he is. I can't imagine it because it's been really summery here in Los Angeles, except for the last couple days or so. And we finally feel like we're getting a little bit of fall weather. But I understand over the weekend it's supposed to get up to 80, so I guess that's not really fall-like.
Well, that's terrible.
Oh, I know, and isn't that awful?
I feel so sorry for you.
I know. I was, telling someone the other day, I can actually remember taking my kids to the beach on New Year's Day, and actually going in the water. It was that warm. It's just, it's really crazy. I didn't grow up here, and that's why I guess I really appreciate the weather. Other things like traffic, not so much. But anyhow, I want to get right into, if you don't mind, Freddie, talking about your new book, Resurrection, because in it, you're sort of calling out the standard interpretation of the meaning of resurrection. And as they talked about the resurrection of Jesus or resurrecting people from the dead, and you're saying we've got the wrong end of the stick if that's what we're thinking, because that's not what they meant at all.
Yeah, and in fact, I was sort of a loose end after I finished my third book on the Knights Templar, and I kept coming across these references to people being raised from the dead, which you usually don't associate that phrase with the Knights Templar. And I'd come across the same thing in my second book as well. It kept being a recurring theme throughout ancient temples and sites of initiation. And I just wondered for a second whether perhaps the story of Jesus that we've been fed in the Western world, the Judeo-Christian framework, that perhaps it's been misinterpreted. And did a little bit of digging around and found that actually there was a rather debauched pope about 3 centuries ago called Pope Leo X, who actually, during one of his less drunken moments, he actually revealed what could be history's biggest gaffe. And I quote, "This fable of Christ has served our company very well." And I wonder, now that's coming from a pope. And he thought that the whole thing, the story of Jesus, was a fable. Well, you sort of backtrack a little bit. And I began to look at sort of at the Gospels that didn't get included in the official canon of the church. Things like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of the Great Seth. These were found buried in a cave in 1947. And the church spent a lot of money trying to make sure they wouldn't be translated. Well, they failed. And in the last 20 years, we have had those published and translated in various languages. And the Gospel of Thomas is particularly damning because he talks about how, anyone who looks at the resurrection is actually, or believes in the resurrection, is actually confusing a spiritual truth with an actual event. And I'm wondering, now, that's a very curious thing to say. So I began to look into this sort of story of Jesus and found out that there was actually at least 16 to 18 Jesuses throughout history that all precede Jesus the man himself. It turns out that Jesus as a story is really a reenactment of the story of Osiris, who's the Egyptian god of resurrection, as he is many other people throughout the Middle East and also in Asia. For example, in Tibet in about 1500 BC, there is a crucified god who atones. He's saved from childhood, from death. He then spends 40 days in the wilderness, comes back, gets killed, gets fixed to a wooden structure in the shape of a cross, and 3 days later, on the 25th of December, gets up from the dead. And this story gets repeated again and again and again, all the way right down to Greek times. There's a god of the Caucasus Mountains, which is between Russia and Turkey, and he too has the same problem, where he is born of a divine virgin, he escapes death, goes walkabout for many years, no one knows what happens to him, and then he comes back, he atones, he gets killed, he gets fixed to a wooden cross, and on the winter solstice, again, he gets out 3 days later, and he's risen from the dead. So it's quite clear that Jesus, although he was a real person, it turns out that Jesus was really a reenactment of a very old ritual called the raising of the dead. And it was something that was really left for people who took many years out of their life to join an inner brotherhood of initiates who were taught the bigger mysteries of life. And the final element in their ritual, which sometimes could last as long as 3 years to learn this stuff, the final element that was that they were risen from the dead. And the reason why they called themselves this was because they looked at ordinary people who walk through life as though they're asleep. They're totally unaware of the bigger picture of how they function in the world, how their soul works in the world, and also the mechanics of nature. They're totally unaware. They seem to think that life is nothing more than a time when you are born, you die, you're bookended by nothing but misery and pain, and that's all there is to it. But these people were different. They saw the world through very different eyes. They had been exposed to an initiation which left them with their eyes wide open. And so they classified themselves different from ordinary people, and that's who they described as the dead. Whereas they, who had actually experienced something profound and spiritually profound, call themselves the living. So in essence, in a small nutshell, that's essentially what the book of the Lost Art of Resurrection was about. It was a short sort of essay on how this very important initiation process was hijacked by the modern church. And up until 2,000 years ago, people like Plato were claiming that it was the highest spiritual development that anyone could possibly experience, which makes me wonder exactly why did the church ban this stuff in the first place.
Absolutely. And isn't it true that these initiates, these reborn people, were also known as sons of God?
Yes, very much so. In fact, it was part of a level of grade when you went into these initiation. I want to say cult, because cult is actually a very good word. It just gets misused. These cults basically had different layers of initiation. And first of all, you were declared a son of a man. The next level would be the son of a woman. And finally, the people who actually made it through the entire initiation process, and it was quite rigorous, not just in terms of mental processing, but also in what they had to prepare themselves to endure as a final stage of initiation, which is kind of a near-death experience, as most initiates describe it. So it was very harrowing. But the people who actually survived that eventually were described as sons of a god, which means, in their terminology, that people had actually successfully crossed over into the other world, and that they were able to mingle with the gods, they were able to mingle with discarnate people. They learned something of great profundity, but they never discussed it. Although some of the myths that we were left with certainly allude to something very, very spiritually profound. And when they came back, they basically had united with God, and therefore they could be described as sons of God. They had literally come to meet their maker. They have essentially seen themselves in the mirror, and they came back much bigger than the sum of their parts.
You know, it sort of makes me recall conversations that I had with Michael Bagent, the late Michael Bagent, who was one of the authors of Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and also, many subsequent books after that. And I was working actually with him on a project a few years ago, and he had come across a document. There was an antiquities collector and dealer in London, and he had this cache of ancient documents and things. And among them was a document that purported to be the handwritten account of Jesus himself, and which he was on trial, and it was his answer to the court, and basically the Sanhedrin, I guess, and basically it said, "I am not the Son of God, I am a Son of God." Now, I do not know whether that is absolutely, been authenticated. There was a book that Michael Bagent wrote about it called The Jesus Papers. And
yes, very good book.
Yeah. And so that very much reminds me of what you're saying. And when I read in your information about them being called sons of God, of course, it took me right back to that. And that's just another tiny bit of corroboration there.
Exactly. In fact, I actually drew on some of his work for my own book, because he'd also pursued a sort of a parallel line of inquiry and went down a very similar path. So I actually drew from that, and then it helped me to actually expand on my own understanding of the whole subject. Because there was actually one of the Gnostic Gospels, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and it's late at night, it's the Gospel of the Great Seth. There is actually a section in which Jesus is actually addressing Peter, watching his supposed crucifixion, and he's saying, "It was not I, it was another who they nailed to the cross. It was another who took the gall and the vinegar." And later on he says, "And I laughed at their ignorance." So Jesus is actually watching himself not being crucified. And this was a position that was actually taken up by the Quran as late as the 7th century, where they actually mentioned him by name as Isa. Jesus in the Muslim world is called Isa, which is very interesting because that's actually the Egyptian name for Isis. Funny they should call him that. And they actually even said that they actually did not nail their man to the cross. They nailed someone else in his stead. His name was Simon of Cyrene.
Simon of Cyrene, that's right.
Exactly the same thing. So if Jesus wasn't nailed to a cross, then he couldn't have been resurrected in the real sense. So this,
I believe there's a good account of that in the Gospel of Barnabas as well.
Yes.
And it's the evidence is out there. I mean, there's definitely evidence out there that does contradict the sort of standard interpretation of the scriptures of the Bible, of the canonical Gospels and the Bible. It would be interesting to know, how many other Gospels or texts that are out there, or even worse, in the Vatican archives that we haven't been able to get access to. Like we have the Gnostic Gospels, the Nag Hammadi Library, the Dead Sea Scrolls, those sorts of things we've had some exposure to now. But I wonder what else there may be that's going to be popping up, either that just hasn't been found yet or has been secreted away.
Yeah, and it makes me laugh, actually, that the Vatican basically stole everything that they could from the Library of Alexandria and so forth. They burned pretty much everything else they couldn't get their hands on. And yet they want to be caught in the act. They've kept so much of this information hidden away. It's as though they want to be caught. It's the funniest thing watching this from the sidelines. But again, you go back to the time when Constantine is sort of, depending on your point of view, he's being coerced or he's actually trying to create this new religion. And even up to that point, the whole story of Jesus was well known to the medieval church, that he was a sort of a living archetype who was following a certain ritual and initiatic tradition. And to the point where the whole point of Jesus of Nazareth actually was a complete misnomer, because Nazareth has been proved that it didn't actually exist in its heyday. It was nothing more than a bunch of hovels and a few caves. And even the synagogue that's listed in the Bible did not exist, or at least no trace of it has ever been found. So where did this Jesus of Nazareth come from? Well, it turns out that Nazareth, the town itself, wasn't really there to speak of, but the term Nazari did exist, and the Nazari was a title given to an initiate of the Mandean order, and it's the most famous person that was associated with the actual Mandean order was, of course, John the Baptist, who was a relative of Jesus. And these two carried the title of Nazari. Now, a Nazari was someone who'd spent 3 years in the inner brotherhood, had actually gone into the Bridal Chamber, which is the special secret chamber that the highest initiates would undertake their final rite of initiation, from which they were raised from the dead after spending either a night or 3 nights immersed in this other world where their soul actually left the body in a sort of a near-death experience. And it was only they who survived who were given the title, and they were able to actually bring people into the inner brotherhood of the living resurrection. They could actually perform the living resurrection ritual. Now, when you see it from that point of view, things start to make a lot more sense, because Jesus wasn't just risen from the dead himself. He was also helping others do so. And the story of Lazarus comes to mind, where if you look at the whole story from a slightly esoteric point of view, it's quite clear that Lazarus panicked. Jesus gets called out in the middle of the night, and he has to go out and roll away the stone. Poor Lazarus is sort of half awake, half asleep. He's not sure if he's coming in or out of the body. And it's quite clear that this poor guy had actually panicked during his initiation ceremony, and he was actually being initiated, if you actually read the story quite carefully, knowing the symbology associated with the initiation practices. But even so, the Mandeans were also following on from very early traditions. I mean, for example, I actually found one of the earliest traditions of a raising ritual in Egypt. Everything eventually comes back to Egypt. And there was one particular chamber in the Pyramid of Unas, which is very unusual. First of all, this pharaoh built himself a beautiful pyramid, lots of underground chambers, a wonderful causeway that goes all the way to the Nile, and yet his body was buried elsewhere. So you've got to start asking yourself a few questions. If this pharaoh spent so much time and effort and money building himself a mausoleum, how come he buried himself somewhere else? And the one thing that the Pyramid of Unas is well known for is the pyramid texts. It's like watching Neolithic wallpaper. The whole chamber, if you haven't been there, is absolutely covered from head to toe, from length to width, with hieroglyphs. And a couple of wonderful Danish gentlemen, whose names I simply cannot remember, and I wrote this in the book so I wouldn't forget, they actually deciphered it. And I was reading through their work, and I thought, wait a minute, the pyramid texts are actually referring to the experience of a person who is not going to be buried after he's dead, but a person who's actually been interred inside this chamber is going into the other world with specific instructions on how to overcome certain obstacles, and he is expected to return fully alive back into his living body. And that's why no one was ever found buried in some of these pyramids. There's another one next door to him in the Pyramid of Teti, and also the Pyramid of Sekhemkhet, which is quite a mouthful at this time of night.
Yeah.
All of these people, including Tutmosis III, none of these people who had mortuary chambers built for them were found buried in their own chambers. It doesn't add up. But the one thing they all have in common, they have these pyramid texts, and it gives them specific instruction on how to take the soul out of the body, how to allow it to navigate in the other world, talk to the right people, come up with the right information, and come back into a living body. And they were expected to go on living many years after. And that, I believe, is one of the oldest explanations of this incredible ritual that was not necessarily reserved for kings and queens. It was also available to lay people. And there's actually a spirit door that was found in the chamber of Teti I. That's another Egyptian pharaoh who was buried next to Unas. And this spirit door basically is a false door. And it has a proclamation on it, and it's in the British Museum today. And it actually talks about the this wonderful person who lived in the household of the pharaoh. He was basically a servant, a manservant. And his exclamation at being given privilege to go into the pharaoh's secret chamber and to be allowed to see the things of the other world. And at the very end, this very excited and very thankful and humble servant says, "And in this chamber I found the way." Now, that might not mean anything to anyone until you actually start researching the Chinese Tao and also the work of the Essenes, who are, of course, the people who ran the time of Jesus. And both of those people have this wonderful secret brotherhood who also took on an inner brotherhood. They taught them the special secrets of raising the dead, and they too were initiated into the cult of living resurrection. And when they completed their apprenticeship, they were declared risen from the dead, and they declared, "I found the way." In fact, the Essenes were called the followers of the way. So all of these things are connected. This is a very, very long line of initiation that goes through for 2,000 to 3,000 years of people who managed to get to the other side in their soul. They managed to peruse the soul world, and they came back very much spiritualized and very much aware of the mechanics of nature.
Well, now, I want to go back to the chambers that you're talking about, and these burial places, or I guess they were not burial places, is what you're saying. The reason that they haven't found any bodies is because that's not what they were for.
Exactly, and they were very interesting places too. A lot of them survived to this very day. Beijing actually found one of them in Italy. It was in a place called Baia. They used to call it Heli in the old Greek days, which is where hell comes from, because the place literally smells like Satan's bottom. I mean, it really is quite, it's like this horrible smell of sulfur. And but the inside chambers behave like, they look like beehives. And I found this all around the world. I was just in Peru, in Silvestani, where they had these things called chulpas. And people have said that these are Inca burial sites. Well, wrong. First of all, they precede the Inca by many, many hundreds of years. And secondly, the insides are shaped like beehives. And the same thing happens in China, in the Middle East, in Ireland, in England, in Europe. All of these places associated with living resurrection or initiation are all shaped like beehives. And in many places, they're also called the Bridal Chamber. Now, the Bridal Chamber was a place where the initiate was expected to couple with his bride, with one big exception. First of all, the initiate was alive, and secondly, there was no flesh and bone bride ever involved, because this bride that the initiate connected with was nothing more than the goddess of nature. She was the essential divine feminine. The divine feminine, for anybody who doesn't know, is the concept of the living nature. She's the personification of life itself, how the universe is created. She was eventually personified in Isis, or the Black Madonna statues that you find throughout Europe. And it was in these chambers where the initiate learned to become a single man. And again, going back to Jesus, he actually once talked about becoming a single man, which is where the church kind of took this very literally and said, well, Jesus was then never married because he talks about being a single man. Well, a single man was actually one of the most important features of the initiation ritual of going into the other world, because that's when the person learned to harmonize his or her exterior with their interior, as above, so below. And that final coupling with the bride in the bridal chamber was essentially a sacred marriage. This person became wedded to the divine virgin. So what they were trying to say in the language of the temple is that these initiates had learned the secrets of the mechanics of nature. Now that's big stuff, because once you know the mechanics of nature, you have a degree of control over the manifestation process. And that's where the story of Jesus now takes on greater significance, and people like him, because they're able to do very unusual things. They were, changing water into wine and walking on water. These are all suggestions that they're able to have a degree of control over the manifestation process. So you put these pieces together and you wonder, why did the church ban all this? Well, because this information in the wrong hands, now knowing what we know about the power of intent, this information in the wrong hands can have very dire consequences. And I believe that, having read through so many of these extracts, that this is the reason, above all, why these sects were very secret, why they protected the initiates from any kind of outside influence, why they protected their secret chambers, and why they were very secret. Because you didn't want the wrong people to go in there with the wrong intent, bring back information from the other world, and then apply it on a human level to create all kind of havoc. So they were basically secret for a very good reason. They were protecting very important information in these chambers.
Now, do you think that it would have been possible, or is possible, for a person with the wrong intention to get in there and have the same access to knowledge that, a person who's going in, as an honest seeker would have?
Oh, they had some great trials to make sure that there was checks and balances in place to make sure that the right people stay on the right side of the fence, or in this case, the right side of the wall. They basically went around like troubadours, talking about certain spiritual truths, very highly veiled in songs, in parables, and we know how important parables are in holy books, to the point where they don't seem to make much sense. Well, that's because to most people that read the parables or heard the parables or the songs, they were lay people, they were simple, and for them it was nothing more than entertainment. It's a fun story. But then there were those few people in the crowd that would say, well, wait a minute, there's something more to this story that meets the eye. And it was those people that were chosen out of the crowd that were allowed to come into these societies, these secret sects, and they were taught for the first year, under a period of observation, a few sort of breadcrumbs about the lesser mysteries, about how the world really works. And during that year of observation, they were kept under tight scrutiny for their behavior, for possible deception, but mostly for their honesty and their ability to be responsible with information that they were about to receive. And out of those people, once they sorted out the elephants from the sheep, it was those very, very few people who then were allowed to become candidates for initiation. And they were then given the mysteries of the greater mysteries. The parables were taken apart. They were shown for what they were. They were carriers of incredible spiritual truths. So there were these huge checks and balances that went all the way up to the Greek era, classical Greek era. But then something begins to fall apart around the time when the Romans show up.
Freddie, can you hold that thought? We need to take a quick break, and we shall be right back. Stay tuned. You're listening to Night Vision Radio. Our guest is Freddy Silva.
Hi, Bob Tarmac for MJ'sHealthyWay.com. Are you into vitamins, nutrition, meal replacements, health shakes, keeping your body in good shape, your internal engine going? Boy, do I have a perfect place for you. MJ'sHealthyWay.com. They offer the best service and products, and they'll tell you anything you need to know about any product they have to offer. I get all my vitamins, meal replacements, shakes from MJ'sHealthyWay.com. That's spelled MJSHealthyWay.com. There's so much more at the website. Go check it out. MJ'sHealthyWay.com.
Hello, everyone. Lorian Fenton here, host of the California MUFON radio show, asking if you'd like special access to exclusive and amazing information about UFOs, the paranormal, and all things unexplained. If you're nodding yes, then join IRN's Insider Club. As an Insider Club member, you'll get an all-access pass to premier Inception Radio Network content for only $4.99 a month. This includes live UFO and paranormal conferences, live streaming UFO skywatches, exclusive IRN radio and TV productions, and of course, paying radio with MJ and Ken Storch. So don't wait any longer. Visit InceptionRadioNetwork.com and click on Member Login to join IRN's Insider Club and get your VIP access today.
Do you have a smartphone? If so, Inception Radio Network is the best app for you. Available on iTunes, Android, Samsung, and most other app stores. Just search Inception Radio Network. With the app you can listen live, check out podcasts of recent and past shows, view our videos, see what shows are coming up, who the guests are, and, via the chat room, send live questions to those guests. You know it makes sense. Check your app store now. Inception Radio Network. I'll see you there.
Hey IRN listeners, make sure you tune in to Night Vision Radio with René Barnett. René will be exposing the truth one secret at a time. When? Thursdays. Every Thursday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. Pacific. Where? Right here on IRN.
Hi, I'm John Payne, vocalist for the band Asia FJP and creator of Las Vegas's Raiding the Rock Vault. You know, music provides the very soundtracks of our lives and has the power to impassion and inspire us like nothing else. My friends at returnofthetroubadour.com understand that as well, and that's why they're sponsoring a contest in search of a very special song, a song that uplifts the heart and inspires the soul. I'm very pleased to be sitting on the panel of distinguished contest judges, and by the way, prizes are quite nice too. So if you're a songwriter, don't delay. Go to returnofthetroubadour.com for all the contest details and deadlines, and send us your song. It could just be that special one. That's returnofthetroubadour.com, where they know music can change the world.
You're locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin.
And we're back. You're listening to Night Vision Radio. I'm your host, René Barnett. Our guest this evening is author Freddy Silva. We're talking about a little bit of a controversial subject. We're talking about the interpretation of resurrection. Have we had it all wrong all this time? And Freddy, you were in the middle of an explanation and a thought, so I'd like for you to please continue that. And then I have some questions I want to ask you about your own personal experiences.
Oh, sure. Yes, we're getting into the Roman era. What have the Romans done for us? As the old Monty Python joke goes. Well, according to the initiates, not much, because by the time the Romans show up, things start falling a little bit apart, because the Romans had lost the plot. They were basically borrowing stuff from the Greeks, which they had no idea what, they really had little understanding of what the Greeks were doing. And the Greeks basically, if this stuff had been underground, they went even more underground, because they realized that, there were Roman leaders who really wanted to get their hands on what they had. And I read that the Greeks were so protective about these resurrection ceremonies that people were actually not allowed to talk about them in terms of what exactly happened during the final stages of initiation into the raising the dead. And it was actually a criminal offense for you to even discuss this with your closest friends, because what you saw on the other side as a soul stayed with you. This was very personal information. It was for you to use this information in your daily life. So when the Romans show up, they basically had a sort of a light understanding of what was going on, but it was really superficial. And this is where the whole thing really falls apart, where the emperors who couldn't get hold of the initiation secrets, they basically started to tear down the temples. And after that, of course, you have the incoming Catholic Church. And basically, they totally misunderstood the idea of resurrection, or they basically hid the whole concept of resurrection, because I think they believed that there was something of enormous benefit for people. People described being woken up. People like Plato and Pythagoras, who themselves also were initiates of the Greek mystery schools, they described the raising the dead ceremony as the greatest spiritual development of their careers. And in fact, Plato says that his own initiation experience went on to shape his philosophical movement. So we're talking about people who are the foundation of our Western thought, who actually believed that this extraordinary out-of-body experience that they went through shaped their lives in so many ways, right down to the point where even in Isaac Newton's time, he too underwent this process. And I believe he did that with the Freemasons, who are still, in one way or another, depending on which group you're talking to, still perform the ritual figuratively in the third degree, when a candidate is raised from the figurative grave, his blindfold is removed, or her blindfold, because there are free Masonic women, and they are declared risen. So Isaac Newton, of course, went on to work with gravity, and he claims that it was his actual involvement in this initiation that led him to those discoveries. So we can see here, through these fragments throughout history, that people obviously drew enormous personal benefit from this experience, which is why I felt compelled to write the book in the first place, because this is not something that was done 2,000 years ago and has been forgotten. It is a lost art, but there are ways to actually engage with certain parts of the environment in order to actually have that sort of experience. And once you have that experience, believe me, you will not forget it.
Well, that sort of brings me to my next line of questioning here. I wanted to find out, had you ever done this initiation process? And what about the rest of us poor schlubs that can't get to Egypt every other week? And, how certainly there must be more than one way to, skin the proverbial cat and have there can't just be one location where you can go to and get this divine experience. I just can't, I wouldn't be able to accept that. Please tell me that's not true.
No, you're correct. You're absolutely right. In fact, these little hotspots are everywhere. In fact, they're even here in North America. I read many accounts from Native Americans before we killed them by some very astute American gentlemen who actually went out to the Southwest and actually wrote about their
as long as I'm back here, let's see who else is here.
And
Awesome! We got a bunch of people here. Hey, Amy and Bob and Deb.
Library of Congress, which is the greatest bastion of this country, as far as I'm concerned, that has the most incredible information about these hotspots where people can, under certain conditions, actually have an out-of-body experience. Today we call them sacred sites. So yes, the Great Pyramid, certainly one of those places. There is, of course, Bell Rock in Sedona. There is the Holy Mountain of Cochabamba, which is on the frontier of California and Mexico. All of these places around the world were deemed to be hotspots where the energy of the Earth is such that the electromagnetism and the gravitational aspects of the location interact with your body and your mind to facilitate an out-of-body experience. So without too much preparation, you can have this kind of experience. For example, if you sort of meditate or you do transcendental meditation or even Kriya Yoga, that kind of brings you into an approximate experience of an out-of-body state. Not to the degree, I think, with which the initiates describe the experience, but certainly close to it. And I was actually, which brought up the whole point of shamanism. You know, for example, if we take enough ayahuasca and things like that, do we have the same experience? Well, I discovered in my research that it's a parallel experience when you use these drugs to leave the body, but to a certain degree, you are out of control. Unless, of course, you do it enough and with the right people, under the right circumstances, because it can be dangerous. But the big difference with the initiation ceremonies into living resurrection was that the soul appears to have total control while it's out of the body. And that's a big difference from shamanism. So, yes, you can approximate it today using narcotics. The initiates in the old days also used a small narcotic just to numb the senses and, to trepidation. Because if someone's about to tell you, you're about to have an out-of-body experience, you're probably, no matter how many years you've been sort of guided on this, you're not going to feel very relaxed. And I did find that there are many narcotics that were given to the initiates before they actually fell into a state of deep sleep, but it was just enough to knock them out and leave them in total control. So that's the big difference between shamanism and the initiation ceremonies, but certainly there are hot spots all over the earth where you can do this.
And is there a way that you can sort of create that sort of energy for yourself in a location? It kind of reminding me like of the Sweat Lodge. I grew up in Native America. I grew up in Oklahoma, and where, a lot of tribes, I grew up in the Choctaw Nation, and I was just outside the Cherokee Nation, and, they would have these tribal ceremonies and go into the Sweat Lodge. And it was sort of, I understand, I've never done it, that it can kind of be an out-of-body experience. And the other thing it was sort of reminding me of is what they would call going on a vision quest. And I think that on those occasions, that might have been when they might have used peyote or something of that nature to help facilitate that vision quest.
It's very similar. Similar.
So there is a relation between that sort of thing. So now I know, that there definitely is energy, flowing through the earth. And I do know that there are locations around this planet that are just special. There's just no two ways about it. My favorite spot in the world is the Languedoc in France. And I go down there as often as I possibly can. And spent lots and lots of time there. And the water there is amazing. And very therapeutic, and the land itself, I mean, it's just buzzing with energy. I think, and it's measurable, scientifically measurable. The telluric currents are very strong there. So is it necessary? I guess it's at least better if you can get yourself to one of these locations, and there probably are some that are closer than we might think.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm where I'm speaking to you from right now, under my building, there's actually a network of the Earth's telluric currents that actually cross right in my bedroom. The girls leave in hysterics, of course.
I don't think
but
that's
it's
why,
true.
though. I think there's another reason for that.
Oh, absolutely. The more I've gone through life, I'm probably not the reason. No, I've actually, in all seriousness, I do find that when I talk to people around the world, and I get to travel a lot, that people who do this kind of work, whether they're healers or searchers, they are drawn to locations where they live, where the Earth's energy is very strong. And I think that they're living off the grid, and they're also feeding information back into the grid. It's a two-way system. And it's funny that you should have brought up the sweat lodge, because when you go to a kiva, I don't know whether you've noticed this, but there's a fire pit. And there's a small hole in the ground, usually adjacent to the fire pit, and no one pays any attention to that little hole. It's very important. It's called a sinapu. And the native cultures describe this as a place where a tube of energy connects to usually the pole star, and it's a tube through which the souls are allowed to come into the world and through which the souls leave. And they always leave that section empty when they're having a medicine man ceremony in the kivas. Well, the funny thing is, the exactly same tradition exists in Persia, where the most sacred of mountains are said to be connected. There's usually a cave somewhere near the summit, and those caves are connected to a golden reed that connects to the other world. And I thought, that's an incredible similarity on the other side of the world. Now, you fast forward this story to 2008, and NASA came out with the most incredible press release. It said, and I quote, that the Earth is linked to the sun through magnetic portals of energy which open every 8 minutes. So there is some scientific basis to all of this, that these sacred sites appear to be, and I've put several lines into NASA who have not yet responded, that these sacred places are indeed connected to something else that's outside the planet, and the ancestors were drawing on that energy in order to facilitate and help the soul escape that gravitational pull inside the body. So all of these things are very much connected in order to get you to have that state of out-of-body experience.
Wow, that is really interesting. I wonder what it is that has occurred that has made these particular areas so amazing and so energetic. I wonder if it would have anything to do with meteorite strikes or anything like that, especially these places that have underground water and that could carry that energy.
Well, when I was researching my second book, the Divine Blueprint, I actually came across this, and it took me 15 years to work it out, just by experience, observation, reading. That there were actually 7 principles to each sacred site, and they always, every sacred site in the world, including the Navajo altar, which is in Monument Valley, they are basically the focal points of water, whether it's nearby or underground, which creates its own electrical charge if it runs through the right sort of rock. They are confluences of magnetism. There are places where certain geometrical aspects come into play when people build the right type of building. They use a specific type of rock. So you start layer caking all of these things at the same site, and then, of course, you add the 7th ingredient, which it was the one that eluded me the most, and it was almost so obvious, because all of these places were built for the self-empowerment of the individual. And I thought, well, of course, the last ingredient is the person itself. Because when you actually take yourself in a state of prayer to these sites, and you take your intent, and your intent is balanced and pure, you actually activate and glue these things together, and suddenly all these elements come together under one influence, and you are holding these things together. And that's why it was so important to put people there who had the highest integrity, because once you act as the glue to the disparate elements in one location, then, of course, the whole thing acts as a unified whole, and suddenly the whole landscape becomes one and an indivisible organism with you. So you are totally immersed in the body of the Divine Virgin. You become a single man or a single woman. in the literal sense of the word. You become totally ingrained with the spirit of place. Now, you do that thousands of times over thousands of years, and of course, all that energy is going to be laying itself on top of the other. And that's why so many of these places are sacred sites, is because you're actually drinking the prayers, the devotions of people before you. And of course, the water in the sites or under them remembers this. And we now know from 5 different laboratories around Europe that homeopathy really does work, despite what the skeptics will tell you. If 5 different universities can say that, yes, water is able to be imprinted just with the power of intent, then think about what you're doing when you go to these sacred sites. They are really very powerful places, and you are remembering the stories and the information that's been laid there for thousands of years. So it gives you an idea of what these people do when they connect to these sites, and they actually start to, under the right circumstances, to extract important information, to extract important knowledge, which you then apply on a practical basis in your life. And I was reading the stories of so many people that had gone through initiation. They didn't reveal what they said, but you can tell from their actions that they became enlightened people. They became great leaders or extraordinary healers or visionaries. So they obviously became very Christed. They became much more than some of their parts, and they were able to lead exemplary lives that show to others that we don't have to just suffer a life that's bookended by pain. We can actually make a life succumb to our particular intent, and we can have a certain degree of control over our manifestation process. And organized religion, that is very dangerous.
Well, I'm afraid I have to agree with you on that, as most people know my feelings about that. But now, I want to, before we go too much further, because we're getting close to the end of the show, believe it or not, I want to let everyone know what your website is, how they can get your books. Freddy's website is invisibletemple.com. And he's also an amazingly talented photographic artist. And you can check that out at freddysilva.com. Yeah, I was on there. I said, oh my goodness, that is amazing. It's just absolutely gorgeous.
School. So one of my little side distractions is doing fine art photography wherever I can.
Oh, it's just absolutely beautiful. Just beautiful. But now also you can get Lost Art of Resurrection on invisibletemple.com, as well as the Divine Blueprint, which includes some of the things we were just talking about power places and energy sites and that sort of thing. But now I'm gonna really ask you to indulge me for just a moment and go off topic just a tiny bit, maybe not. You know, I know you wrote a book about the Templars, and I was just wondering. I mean, it's kind of known by people that are into the Knights Templar that they really weren't that into Jesus.
Not at all.
However, they were into Mary Magdalene, and they were into John the Baptist. Now, I kind of understand, I guess, how, maybe they were drawn to the divine feminine, possibly goddess worship or something like that. So I can kind of more understand the Mary Magdalene part. But why John the Baptist?
Well, John the Baptist is still revered to this very day by the Mandeans, who survived as a small Gnostic Christian sect in southern Iraq. They're highly persecuted. The only thing of value that they put any focus on is the Book of John. It's the Gospel of John the Baptist, which the church has denied does not exist. Well, in which case they're reading a very blank book, because they still have it today. And John the Baptist was essentially one of the, he was a Nazarite. He was a priest at the highest level of initiation. He could do the ritual baptism with living water, and he could also initiate people into the cult of living resurrection. And when you trace the Templars back, as I did in the book, and it's actually one of my, I feel it's one of my greatest achievements, this little book, because it talks about something about the Templars that no one else has actually figured out, and I thought would written everything about the Templars that there possibly could be, but obviously the best part of the story has never been written. And when I began to backtrack the story through John the Baptist to the Mandeans, I suddenly realized, my God, if the Mandeans were into the living resurrection, and this was one of the purest cults at the time, then the Templars was essentially tapping into this very pure initiation process, and they were resurrecting the practice in the medieval era. And they could get away with it because they found that Bernard of Clairvaux essentially created the Templars. In fact, most of the Templars were Cistercian monks. 3 of them I discovered were actually Portuguese. And they were basically trying to create this kingdom within the kingdom. They created Europe's first nation state called Portugal. And in this kingdom, they began to revitalize the whole concept of the resurrection ceremonies in secret chambers. And I actually have a copy of one of the books that was caught. There was one Templar master who was trying to outrun the Inquisition. He got caught with this secret book in his possession. And it's because of the Vatican archives that we've found this book. And in there it says quite clearly that Article 9 of the Rule of the Brothers Elect talks about how the brothers should go about their meetings to discuss the alchemical processes of turning base metal into gold, which is an old allegory for taking a base human being and transforming him or her into something much greater. And this should be done in secret chambers. And during my research into the early Templars, I actually came across many of those chambers in Portugal, which is my original country of birth. So they basically were following the old concept of the Mandeans, whose head was John the Baptist, who basically was a figurehead and the very symbol of the resurrection ritual. And all the brothers who were part of the Templar Inner Brotherhood, after going through a long period of observation, just like the Essenes, they were declared risen from the dead, and they did this in secret chambers all throughout Europe. And when the Inquisition finally caught up with them, and the King of France also, as we know, Philip IV was the one that put the nail in their coffin. The only thing of value that the Inquisition found in the preceptory of the Templars in Paris was a mummified head, which the visitors called the Baphomet, which people have always thought is some kind of devil. Well, a little bit of Arabic helps you very well with this, because Baphomet is actually an Arabic word which means the source or father of wisdom. And this head, of course, was the mummified head of John the Baptist. So there you have it. They were protecting the very source of this resurrection, living resurrection ritual, which they basically discovered during their time in the Middle East.
And there were stories that from the time that this head would actually talk to them. Do you think that was just part of the, whole Inquisition in Vatican?
Oh, I know what you're saying.
Way of putting it down so that they seem like devil worshippers and all that, or was there a way that they actually animated this head?
Well, it was actually, all these things have to be seen in the figurative context, remember. We're talking about secrets. Secrets are always highly veiled within allegories and double meanings. When they said that they could actually make the head speak or speak with the head, it goes back to an old concept of the cult of the head, which goes back at least 3,000, 4,000 years, where the head or the decapitated head of a spiritual leader was usually buried in a sacred mound in order for the energy that was held within the head, or believed to be residing in the head, which is the soul, could be maintained in its integrity at a special spot where the earth's energies were very potent.
Oh, gosh.
So, yes, the whole concept that they could talk, yes, you could talk within their inner vision. They could use it as a kind of totem to concentrate upon. And
goodness, Freddie, I would love to keep going, but the music is playing, and we have to go for this evening. You got to come back.
I thought it was in my head.
Thank you so much, Freddy Silva.
Thank you, René.
Good night, everybody.